This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
Attracting and retaining and growing and engaging the right talent in ways that will actually grow your organization absolutely depends on leaders.
Hmm.
I often say that leaders shape culture and culture drives success.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. It's great to meet you, and I'm excited to talk about this subject. But I wanted to get started just to ask you, like, how did you end up starting your own consulting business and getting into the leadership and team development space?
Yeah, so I am a self-professed corporate survivor. After swearing, by the way, after I finished college, I was never going to go into corporate. That was just not where I saw myself. But alas, that was where the opportunities were when I finished college. And so I spent about 20 years there. And one day in 2011, I was, by that time, I was the vice president of human resources for a very large global organization. And you know the story. I was traveling 3 weeks out of every four. I had the entirety of my desk in a rolling suitcase, so I would always have my paper files with me. We were not as up to date on the digital files back then. And I got a health scare, and one test led to another that led to a diagnosis of cancer. And so 2011 became my transformational year. I think if you talk to any business owner, any entrepreneur, most, if not all of them, have some sort of a transformational experience that pushed them out of the complacent mode that they were operating in and push them to, sort of leap into the entrepreneurial unknown. And for me, it was the cancer diagnosis because I had to go from 150 miles an hour, traveling all the time, leading and motivating a team to literally full stop, taking a month off of work, having surgery, having follow-up treatment. And about the second week that I was on leave post surgery, hadn't been looking at email, hadn't checked in with my team, truly wanted to make sure that I gave recovery my full attention. And it was in that silence that I finally could not outrun that voice in my head that had been trying to ask me for far too long, are you doing what you're passionate about?
Mhm.
And I had to acknowledge the answer was no. Now, I was at the time, I was vice president of human resources, and I was really being pushed and challenged, and I had the great fortune to lead an immensely talented team. But that role was just not what was lighting me up. And I had
Mhm.
to admit that. And what I found was once you have that type of an answer, you're really obligated to do something with that. And so I finished my month of leave. I came back. I had a heart to heart with my boss. And because I had been in the company for close to 15 years, we were able to kind of negotiate a very amicable parting of ways. I had a very protracted exit. I think I stayed for several months after I made that decision, just to sort of get my head in the right place, my team situated so that there were no hiccups after I was gone. But yeah, it was the biggest challenge of my life to go up against cancer, and it was the biggest gift I could have received because it was because of that that I leapt into the unknown. I didn't keep waiting for a better time, a better year, a bigger plan.
It's interesting your stories like that because we do talk to a lot of our guests that have moments like that where they have a chance to reflect and they do recognize, like, am I doing what I was put on earth to do? Is this my true passion? And I know for me, the story is probably a little more like boiling of the frog, where it was like great when I started, but the temperature was way up towards the end. And when I got out of corporate, I realized that how unhealthy a relationship I had with my work, because similar to you, I was traveling all over the place, lots of pressures, multiple plants, multiple challenges. And yeah, and I think when I stepped away from that and went into my own world, into my own business, I found myself, I found my true north again, and so
Yeah.
so I think that story is very familiar to a lot of our listeners because they've heard similar stories from other guests. And again, it's great that it's terrible that you have cancer, that you had cancer, but it's great that you found, what you were put on earth to do. And I think that's an exciting part of the story. So like, so what do you focus on, and why do clients specifically seek you out and what you do with companies?
So I am, the short answer is I'm an executive leadership advisor. So typically large growing organizations will seek me out because they are grappling with one, if not more, of typically about four different pain points. And they dress it up in different ways, they use different words, but it essentially comes down to one or more of the following. They're having problems attracting the right talent into their organization. So what I would call low attraction. A lot of them are grappling with high turnover, especially in such a candidate market right now. So they're grappling with low retention. Many of them also, because they don't have the right talent coming in and they don't have the right talent staying, those who are left are not deeply engaged. So
Mm,
they are sort of phoning it in. So there's low engagement. And then I would say the fourth pain point is really all about low growth, right? So all of this sort of snowballs into, we are not growing at the rate that we wanted to. We are not able to fulfill the growth outcomes that we had identified for our organization. And not coincidentally, we are also not giving the people in our organization enough paths and enough opportunities to grow their own careers, which of course then feeds back those into those earlier pain points of not attracting the right talent, not keeping the right talent, not engaging the right talent.
it's interesting too, because if you look at the first three, low attraction, low retention, low engagement, these are traditionally leadership issues, right? They're things that leaders have to do. And as you mentioned, this is a candidate, or this is an employee focused market right now. Employees have more power than employers, I think, right now. You can leave your job after 6 months and have a resume full of that, and there's no concern with that anymore, right? So and if you're not creating an environment where employees love to come to work and they're doing what they feel like they've been put on earth to do, they're going to leave and go find another job. So retention is more difficult in these markets. But again, if you have low attraction, low retention, low engagement being leadership issues, you're likely going to have the low growth. So you're going to have the problem with the first three is it's going to lead likely to that last point. And so that's a big challenge for leaders, and especially now, I think in this market more than ever post pandemic, I think attracting and retaining talent is a huge issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too many organizations still are focusing on that fourth pain point
Yeah.
as the foundation of their problem. And what I try to get organizations to understand is the root of their problem is not that they can't grow. The root of their problem is more cultural. It's more foundational. It's
Mm,
the fact that they are bringing in talent. Maybe it's the right talent, but they're bringing them in the wrong way. They're not anchoring them to roles that really play to their strengths. They're not putting in teams and under leaders where there's a strong foundation of and platform of trust. And then of course there are not sufficient development paths and learning journeys that really you just said a moment ago, where employees can kind of find their own personal meaning, their own personal purpose. And when those things are lacking, they're not going to expend the discretionary effort to help you achieve your growth strategy if they can't attach personal meaning. And you very rightly said all of those pain points, including the fourth one around growth, are leadership pain points. They are
yeah.
leadership challenges. In some cases, they are leadership deficiencies. And I think especially the first two come down to a lack of clarity, right?
Mm,
So if you're not able to attract the right talent or not able to recognize the right talent when you see it, it's largely because you don't have a clear, compelling reason for the right talent to join you, right? And so there's a lack of clarity there. And then I also find the more that I work with these types of organizations, one of the main reasons they are not able to retain the right talent is because they are not clear in terms of how to use that talent in ways that play to their strengths individually and collectively, and in ways that help feed what motivates them individually. And as you said, it's an employee market. Employees have more power than employers right now. We used to call it job hopping, and there was such a
Yes.
negative connotation. And
Yeah.
now it's really about the experience throughout their career of getting to try different things. We all sort of joked about the millennials. Oh, they don't have work ethic. They want to, just have a job for a paycheck to support their lifestyle. And then pretty soon we all kind of looked at that and said, you know what, they might be onto something. One, because they don't treat a job as a cradle to grave experience that they have to tolerate. And two, I have never seen a generation previous to the millennials who advocate for themselves so fiercely in terms of what they will tolerate and not, the types of experiences that they want, and the amount of time they're going to invest in your organization if you don't show an investment in them. So it's a really interesting sort of social experiment if you have a leadership team with the appetite and sort of the internal resolve to take a look at that more holistically.
I think you're right. I mean, as a Gen Xer, for me, seeing the millennials when they came in and now the Gen Zs, you definitely can say, well, wait a second. Well, these guys are not into sacrificing themselves for the sake of the company like I was, right? And you can get negative about it, or you can say, like you said, like, oh, they've wait a second. Thank you for bringing that up. Like we have, we were raised on you did whatever the company asked you to do because you want to get that 50 years in and get that gold watch and ride off into the sunset. And I think it's shifted a lot. And I think, I give the younger generations credit for standing up for themselves because we didn't. We just sort of tolerated whatever came down the pike, right? And because we, that's and so instead of being negative about it, I think you're right to say we should say, oh, that's interesting. Thank you for being an advocate for even me because I'm
Yeah.
not going to be I was never an advocate for myself throughout my career. So I think it is good to see that.
And it's so interesting because I'm a fellow Gen Xer, so I relate to that so strongly, right? I mean, we were always trained. First of all, the company you started with was a company you left with,
Yeah.
and most of us Gen Xers do have changed jobs throughout our career, not nearly as much as millennials and Gen Z. But it's interesting because we were always raised to understand that the first few years in your career, let alone in any new company, you had to pay your dues, right? Paying your
Yeah.
dues was a
Yeah.
big thing in
Yeah.
Gen X. And now the millennials and the Gen Zs and who even knows who's coming up behind them, they don't associate with that. They sort of laugh at that and say it's not that we don't want to work hard, but we want to work hard on things that we believe in. And we
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
do that in not organizations, but in communities where we feel like we belong, where we feel like the work that we do is meaningful and somehow lights us up inside. And those are things that, if we're really honest with ourselves as Gen Xers, we're kind of jealous about, right? I almost want to do over and kind of start that journey that I was propelled into in 2011 and start that earlier. And I won't admit, but you're a Gen Xer too, like what year that started with my career.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because, I think us Gen Xers were sort of forced to go away from the 5-year-old inside of us who always pestered our parents with why. We constantly asked, why this, why that? Why is the sky blue, the grass green, the dog died? Like, what is it? And we kind of went away from that because as we entered the working world, we were all about paying our dues, climbing the ladder, and doing what we were told. Well, now, the millennials, the Gen Zs kind of walk in and they have not let go of that childlike, enthusiastic
Yeah.
curiosity to understand, why is it are you asking me to do this particular task within this
Yeah.
particular role? And even before I agree to do that, why does your organization exist to begin with? And I think it's those questions that, rather than us going like the parents when we were 5, go away from me, you're bothering me, I really think they have to sit with that and come up with more compelling answers to those questions.
I agree. Yeah, one of my favorite employees is he might be listening, but he's a college graduate, and so definitely Gen Z, didn't know anything about our industry, but we trained him in the technical side of it. and he loves what he does, and he's curious and asks questions. He asks why all the time, and it's like, and I actually love it because he wants to learn, and we just keep giving him more and more responsibility, and he just loves it. And I just think I think you're right on with this idea that they don't lose that childlike curiosity, and I absolutely love that. One of the things you said too is I think it's important is, this idea of Gen X is thinking that employees need to pay their dues. I think is partly a problem why people don't last in organizations. It's one of the things I talk about too, in that you get, when you hire somebody, they come in, say it's a college graduate, they're young, they're enthusiastic, they want to make a difference. Sometimes they dreamed about working for your company and you finally hired them, so they're finally in the door. And then a lot of companies will just give those employees grunt work for 2 to 3 years. And so they come in with all this energy and all this excitement and wanting to make a difference. And then they're doing spreadsheets or whatever. They're doing some sort of a grunt work for years. And then 3 years in, you finally give them an opportunity and they're like, look, I'm going to go find something else to do because this is not what I dreamed of doing. And we lose them. We take a 100% engaged employee and we create a 20% engaged employee over those 3 years when they're paying their dues. And so I think there's better ways to do it. And I know onboarding is part of what you help with, but that's a big part, I think, of helping to create, an environment where you're going to retain talent because they feel like they're making a difference on day one.
Well, and again, it's about, you pointed out when I listed the 4 pain points that those are all leadership challenges. And this again comes back to leadership of organizations has to evolve.
Mm.
We were subjected to to the same paying our dues activities of reading spreadsheets or reading manuals or spending the first 2 full days of our job, sitting in a dark room, reading binders about benefits, corporate policies and everything else. But as Gen Xers, we were told that was the only way and that's the way it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
The generations coming behind us are asking why. They're saying, why is it like that? Couldn't you just give me an app? Can't you gamify that experience? Can't you,
Yes.
they're not looking for the easy button. They're looking for the meaning button,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because there is so much more choice for them. And they do live now in an environment where they don't have to pay their dues in the same way. They don't have to wait their turn, right? I mean, I'm a huge sports fan. And I think about, when we were growing up and watching football, it was understood that the young guns coming out of college that were drafted to be quarterbacks spent the first few years
Yeah.
learning under somebody else, right? And now they get drafted, they're immediately thrust into the spotlight. And I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's because it's the expectation of the young athlete, or it's because of the pressure to, for the organization, its owners, its fan base to start producing on day one. Go out and
Mm.
get that great draft pick, go, trade up to get the Heisman Trophy winner. And then you wonder why they struggle on the professional stage. I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's the NFL kind of evolved how they're going to use talent, certainly. They've kind of gone away from the bench, but I think part of the reason for that is because, just like organizations, we have a much lower tolerance threshold for waiting for people to achieve growth outcomes, right?
Mm.
The honeymoon period for a CEO is a lot shorter than it used to be.
Yeah.
Jack Welch spent 30, 40 years in GE. The CEOs today average tenure is 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
And if they don't start to make a material improvement and progress toward the long-term growth objectives within the first 18 months, they're out of a job.
Mm.
And so there are these constant kind of forces that conflict with each other, right? Because you have the shorter tenure of a CEO who is asked to lead a company to achieve growth outcomes that will more than likely outlast their tenure.
Yeah.
And then amass a team and coalesce around this idea that they're going to contribute their best heads, hands, and hearts to achieving those growth outcomes. And the bulk of those employees are not going to be there to see the 5 to 10 year outcomes either, because they're all moving around. So there's this constant flux, but leaders at the top are still thinking of that mindset that you and I grew up with, which is,
Yes.
well, spend the first 2 weeks getting onboarded, reading policies and benefits manuals. They'll spend the first 3 years paying their dues. People don't tolerate that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, not at all. Not at all. We talked about it. I put it in the introduction that, that leaders are really a big part of, what they help, accelerate the growth of the business. So what are some ways that leaders can, help their teams, work together better, faster, and be more effective in reaching their growth objectives, given everything we've said, that, there's short-term time pressures, there's short-term employees tenure. So what can we do to accelerate performance as leaders?
Yeah, one of my business mentors uses the phrase, "We need to slow down to speed up," and I think this is one of those times, right? Because of all the things we just talked about, there are far more compressed time pressures to make the most of employees that come through your doors, knowing they're not going to stay forever, to make a tangible impact at the top, knowing that a CEO's tenure is shorter than ever, and to make measurable progress toward 5 and 10 year growth outcomes sooner, within the first 6 months, 9 months, 18 months. And the concept of slowing down to speed up is this: you can't just expect to bring in a bunch of talent. They might be rock stars out on the market. You bring them in, you put them into a room, and you say, "Here's the growth strategy, go get it." And then you wonder why people resist. You mentioned in the intro and kind of describing my bio, this concept of cultural resistance. Well, it's real, because when employees come together and they're given a task, you're a military veteran, I'm married to a Marine Corps veteran. The concept of go take that hill and don't question the mission is very unique to the military. In the modern workforce, there's still that 5-year-old in the corner going, why?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter. And I talk to leaders all the time. I talk to private equity all the time about their frustration that they've got this brilliant growth strategy and it is totally achievable, little aspirational, super aggressive, but totally achievable. And they can't for the life of themselves understand why the workforce is resisting. And it's because they didn't slow down and speed up. So the best way to do that is by not just locking people in a room and saying, "Okay, here's the growth strategy, go map out the 5 year plan to get there." First, we have to build two things. We have to build trust. And I know some people in your audience are going to hear that and go, "Yeah, trust is nice to have, but we don't have time for that. That takes too long." If your people don't trust you, and if your
Yes.
leadership team around the boardroom do not trust each other, you're not going to achieve growth strategy. I don't care how brilliant it is. I don't care how achievable it is. I don't care how much you want to harness the competitive spirit of the people in the room. If they don't trust each other and don't trust your leadership, they're not going to expend that discretionary effort. So that's building block one. And then I think building block two is to understand how teams work together more effectively. Because yes, they have to trust each other. They also have to understand how to apply their best skills in ways that are their genius zone, their fast lane, call it what you want, but also in ways that fuel them rather than drain them, and do it in such ways where it complements the other people on the team. Because they have to feel motivated to support the team effort as much as their own individual agenda. Because if they don't, you're not going to achieve a growth strategy because you have a bunch of individual Heisman Trophy winners in the room. It just won't work. So it's building trust and then strengthening team dynamics, to me, are the most important things, which require you to slow down for a moment to work on that genuinely and then just watch everybody fly.
It's really interesting you bring it up because, again, I've dealt with a few private equity groups, and they're all numbers, they're all plans, they all, everything looks great on paper. But then when you talk about just what you just mentioned, which is, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to build trust within the organization. We're going to have to slow down to speed up. They're going to go, well, when is that going to be done? Because we got a time frame. So it's almost like the private equity groups that I've worked with, they don't have that language. They don't speak that language at all. It's the language of the dollar. It's the language of the ROI, the payback. We're going to grow this to 5 years. We're going to spin it off. And so it's interesting because it's when in my time in corporate, my businesses always did better than my peers. And when I was asked to try to explain it, I had a hard time explaining it. And I had a hard time putting into words what I was doing differently. But it was like I have an engaged workforce. They're on board with our plans. They know where we're headed. They know why we're doing what we're doing. And I remember, my bosses at the time, my peers would go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what else are you doing? I'm like, no, that's actually what I'm doing. It's really not rocket science, but it's interesting that you're going back to that. If we want to be successful, we want to reach these aggressive growth targets, we got to get everybody on board with the plan. We've got to make sure, I often say that, that a ship without a crew is just a hunk of steel sitting in the water. It's useless, right? And so a plan without people is exactly the same thing. It's useless. It's not going anywhere until you get people on board and fired up and ready to move that forward. And yes, you have to answer the question, why? Why are we doing it this way? And you have to be
Yeah.
ready to answer that question.
And you circle back to private equity. I think what is in private equity's favor is that typically they're a bunch of really smart men and women.
Yes. Yes.
They don't typically, kind of pool their resources, pool their financial capital, and go out and acquire a company because they're incompetent. So there's no question that the intellectual capital is there. But the disadvantage in the private equity model is that typically they are not allowed to access or have conversations with most of the workforce, or even anyone past the executive leadership team. In a lot of cases, it's only the CEO and maybe the CFO that they are allowed to speak to before the deal is done. And then you talked about time pressures before. What ends up happening is post deal close, now they have this sense of urgency to put their growth strategy in motion, their value creation plan, and they already feel like they are behind schedule.
Yeah.
And so there's this time pressure plus the sense of urgency that they need to make a return. They need to make that multiplier, and they have to do it quickly. Because to your point, most of them are doing this not necessarily to flip it, but to make it as profitable as possible because they saw something in the, in the asset that made them want to go after it. And so, to me, private equity, huge advantage that they're intellectual powerhouses, huge disadvantage that they don't, or just the way the system is set up, they're not allowed to start engaging with the people who actually have to help them fulfill their growth strategy. And what I always say to them is the biggest mistake you continue to make is the first intervention point you have with the workforce, once you are allowed to talk to them, is to tell them that you're changing their payroll system. And I don't know about you, but I've been in rooms where we have told people their payroll system is changing, and you would think we asked them to slay their firstborn.
It is.
It
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
it is bizarre to me. I mean, it's a human nature to resist change. But I say to these investors all the time, I understand you want to get everybody onto the same platform. And I understand that if you're a portfolio company, you already have a platform that you know, but it's not the devil they know. And so rather than skip right ahead to we're going to change the infrastructure that you are used to, let's sit with, again, slow down and speed up. Let's pull in groups of employees and leaders and understand who are our change champions. Let's get you really engaged, not in the brilliance of what the growth strategy is, but why it's going to position your organization that you are fiercely loyal to for amazing success. And it's that little three-letter word, why, that we keep coming back to. It's the reason Simon Sinek is such a famous thought leader, because he has built his entire practice around the concept of this three-letter word. And it's so true. It's so foundational.
Yeah. Yeah. Start with why, right? It's such a great book. And yeah, and it makes so much sense. Absolutely. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, you've got a new book coming out called Growth on Purpose. It's coming out this summer. Tell us a little bit about it and what you're gonna do in that book.
Yeah, so Growth on Purpose is my latest book. It will be hitting bookshelves in early June. I'm super excited about it. So this is the book that really lays out and dives deep into my what I call my 4-pillar framework for helping businesses expand without losing their best talent. It hits head on those four pain points that I mentioned before of low attraction, low retention, low engagement, low growth. And really walks leaders and organizations through putting each of those 4 pillars in place in the right sequence to make sure that you can attract, retain, engage, and grow the right talent, and in so doing, grow your business. And so those four pillars briefly are, they're going to start to sound familiar to you. Aspiration. So really getting absolute clarity around why you're in business in the first place and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. The second pillar is awareness. So again, around this notion of clarity, really understanding what it is that you as an organization and your workforce as individuals and teams are uniquely talented at, and how do we put you in your fast lane so that you can be more productive and more likely to stay, more likely to build up loyalty. That third pillar is acceleration of trust. So it's all about the different things that you can do to strengthen team dynamics, to be more authentic as leaders, to be more transparent across teams so that you can build trust in authentic ways, and so that people will deepen their engagement with you. And then the fourth pillar is alignment on what matters. So when you do all those things in order, when you attract the right talent into your organization through a compelling aspiration, when you then help retain them by making them aware of what they're uniquely good at and putting them in paths to play to those strengths, when you accelerate trust and strengthen team dynamics through natural, genuine, vulnerable leadership, then you align everyone on what matters. And I said before, you can't just skip to tackling the growth strategy. You have to do these other things first, including, and not the least of which is accelerating trust. But that fourth one then comes into play, where you align your people strategy, your talent, all the things that they are working on, with how it's going to move the needle on your growth strategy. And once you do that in order, then you can achieve perpetual growth.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's going to be an amazing book. And you say it comes out in June, is that right?
It is on schedule to come out in early June, so I'm really, really excited
Early
about that.
June. Okay, that's exciting. Well, that's and again, listeners, you've been listening in and you've been hearing a lot of things that we've talked about with Claire, and all that stuff's going to be summarized in really clear in a clear place and in one place, and that's going to be her book coming out in June. So this is fantastic. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
You first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come and share your stage for a short period of time. I've loved this conversation, and I look forward to many, many more in our future. I think you have very astutely kind of guided this discussion around all of the pillars of leadership and culture. And I think, the bottom line is that attracting and retaining and growing and engaging the right talent in ways that will actually grow your organization absolutely depends on leaders. I often say that leaders shape culture and culture drives success. And too often, I think leaders look elsewhere for, the reason for underperformance, the reason for high turnover, the reason for low engagement. And it actually starts with the leaders themselves. So, to me, if leaders finally recognize that they are causing more of the barriers to growth and more of the the accelerators of high turnover, that's actually a good thing, because awareness is the first step. And the second step is to understand, if you're part of the problem, it's within your control to fix it.
Absolutely. Leaders drive culture and culture drives success. Is that what you said?
Leaders shape culture and culture
Shape
drives success.
I
Yep.
love that. That's fantastic. It makes so much sense. I often say that leadership matters, and leadership truly matters. And you're definitely making the case that it does in this wrap up. So this has been fantastic. Claire, how can people find out more about you if something resonated with them? How do they find out more about you, what you do, what your company does, and this new upcoming book?
Yeah. So first, about the book, your listeners can go to growthonpurpose.com. If they there's kind of two options that they can do there. They can sign up and get on the waiting list for the book, so they will be among the first to know when it hits bookshelves. And then the other is they can take a free, it takes about 5 minutes, growth on purpose assessment, and they will get a growth score that gives them a pretty detailed report on a couple of different things that they can do to sort of plug some of the gaps that they're already facing. So that's website one, growthonpurpose.com. If they want to learn about my business, it's talentboost.net. And then my more personal branded website is clairechandler.net.
Okay. And we're going to put links in the show notes for all of those resources, including your social media. Now, I've got to ask this question. I've been all over your social media, and there is a talking chinchilla on your Instagram page. So I cannot leave this conversation with asking you about the talking chinchilla. Tell us about that
Oh,
and why you do it.
okay. So about 7 years ago, my husband and I brought home Munch. So it's short for Lieutenant John Munch. We're big fans of Law and Order SVU. And so I don't know, he just sort of fit that character. So he's Munch for short. And when we were all in lockdown during COVID, you couldn't go out. I couldn't speak on stages. I couldn't really do networking events. I couldn't be on site with clients. So when I'm bored, I get into mischief. And so I found this app that will turn my little chinchilla into a talking pet. And so I just started recording videos every day and was posting them on Facebook. And then they, went over to Instagram. And now he's got a YouTube channel. We've got he must have recorded over 300 videos by now. And it's so interesting because over the last year, like the YouTube algorithm has really picked up his scent, so to speak. So he gets recommended as a video.
I love it.
He has more subscribers than I do. I'm not jealous. It's just a fact. And I have to chuckle because some of the comments that come onto his videos are really hilarious because people just stumble upon his little tips and are just like, what I don't understand what I'm seeing. Like, this is an alternate reality. So if you don't get any value out of his daily leadership tips, and he posts one every weekday, at least go for the entertainment value of the comments because they are just pure gold.
It really is. And again, my hat's off to you for being creative, because I think oftentimes leadership content is dry and boring. And sometimes I'll do videos, me walking through the plant with a daily tip or something like that, but nobody wants to see my face. They want to see a talking chinchilla.
I thought too. I'm like, most of the time I do it in the morning before I start my day. And I'm like, nobody wants to see me first thing in the morning. So, but they'll look at him all day long. It's crazy.
I absolutely love it. And again, listeners, you're in for a treat. And I'll put a link into her Instagram page and the YouTube page for Munch. Is it Munch, the
Yes,
chinchilla?
Munch.
For
Yep.
Munch. And so that you can be entertained like I'm entertained with it. I'm a follower now, and I love it. And they're powerful messages, but they're coming out of a chinchilla's mouth, which makes it even more entertaining. So my hat's off to you for that, to add a little fun to this sometimes boring world of leadership. And so well done in that respect. So
Thank you.
Claire, I want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing your experience, your knowledge. And I hope you come back again, because I really learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate your perspective on things.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it very much. And I would welcome the opportunity to come back. So let's do it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.